Hi, everybody. It's Marcus Collins from MA Properties. So it's July, and so it's time to take a look at what's happening with the Lexington real estate market in the first half of 2024. So what I'm going to be talking about here is half one 2024 condominium market in Lexington. So I have to say I rather enjoy it when we get to July because I've got 6 months worth of data, more than 6 months worth of more than half of the home sales, I should say. And so now I can start beginning to pull together where I think we're going to end up by the end of the year. So some predictions around where this whole year will end up. We can do now, we're kind of halfway through the year. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of information tonight, but there's a lot more information on our website. I'm going to specifically talk about Lexington condominiums, but perhaps you're interested in Waltham, maybe you're interested in Concord, Belmont, Winchester. Lots of information on our website for many, many towns. If you go to maproperties.com statistics, you'll see a screen like this. What it will show you is lots of different statistics for about 50 different towns. So not just Lexington, but all of the surrounding towns as well. So lots of information there if you're specifically interested in buying or selling in one of those towns. So that's the first place to get a lot more information. Similar to what I'm going to show this evening, but perhaps a little bit more as well. So first place, imaproperties.com statistics. Secondly, for those of you who live in Lexington or perhaps come to an open house that we've hosted in Lexington, you will have seen a copy of our 2023-24 market review. Talks a lot about what happened in the market in 2023, much of which is playing out as well in 2024. But also talks about what our 2024 market predictions would be, so you can go check if what I said is actually looks like how it's going to play out. So lots of information in both those sources. What we're going to talk about today is condominiums. I did a separate video on single families. So that's also out there as well. So if it's single families you're interested in, there's a separate video on that one. But this one's about condominiums. So I'll talk about that. Then I'll look at the wider perspective. What's impacting the market here in Lexington, the external forces that are impacting the market. Then something new. We've been looking at the multifamily developments that are occurring in Lexington, but not really articulated how it's going to impact the housing market. So going to redress that this evening and moving forward too as well, of course. I'm going to start looking at what the impact will be of those multifamily developments. And then to finish up, I'll get the crystal ball out, see where I think 2020, the rest of 24, and perhaps even 25 is going to play out in fall. So that's what we're going to talk about in this presentation. So first things first, condominiums. You will have seen many of the graphs I'm going to show this evening before, if you've kind of followed discussions that we've had, with one exception. Let me show you this first of all. This is the number of condominium sales. The graph's pretty common, pretty familiar to you, I guess say, but what's different is the red bar over 2024. That is my projection for the full year. So based on what's occurred this year, in comparison to the prior years, how many additional sales do I anticipate there being in 2024. So this graph is about home sales or condominiums sold. Blue is existing condos. Green is new construction condos. And then this red is the projections. As you can see, the number of sales peaked in 21 as a factor of COVID, but has now been declining ever since. We anticipated that depending on where interest rates went, and we'll have a lot more to talk about that later on, that we would get something similar to the number of condominium sales in 24 that we got in 23, with perhaps the exception of the new construction, because they just kind of pop in with a specific development, and then that disappears when the development is complete. But as you can see, 52 sales last year of existing condominiums, we're projecting 42 this year. So quite a sizable reduction in the number of condominium sales. The reason for that, of course, if you kind of watch the press or listen to the press and watch the news, is that the housing market, not just in Lexington, not just in Massachusetts, but really countrywide, is kind of ground to a halt because many of of the home buyers have interest rates on their mortgages running in 3.5%. Now, if they were to refinance or to buy a new home, those interest rates would be closer to 7%. So that's kind of a doubling in those mortgage interest rates. And that's what's really stalled the market somewhat. Also worth adding that the reason so many people have this locked-in mortgage rate is that many bought after the downturn, after the crash of 2009, 10, and so on. In the years that followed that, an awful lot of homes sold, and they're now the homeowners who are locked in, essentially, with those very low interest rates and are somewhat reluctant to move to a much higher interest rate. So that's kind of put the dampers, really, the brakes, if you will, on the housing market, so not just in Lexington, Massachusetts, in fact, countrywide. You can see this lack of home sales played out if you look at the cumulative sales. What this is, I track cumulative sales based upon the under agreement date, not the sale date. The idea behind that is that we'll have a kind of real-time view of what's happening, not offset by 6 or 8 weeks when up between a property going under agreement and actually selling. So that's why I plot this based on under agreement date. And as you can see, the blue here is the cumulative sales for 23. The pink color is the cumulative sales for 2024, and they're tracking lower and have for actually the majority of the year, as it turns out. That's kind of the sales side of the picture, which is a combination of listing, of seller sentiment and buyer sentiment. So let's kind of focus exclusively now really on the seller side by looking at the number of condominiums that are listed. No surprise, sales are down because listings are down, and you can see quite a dramatic reduction where we're projecting for the number of condominiums listed in 2024 in comparison to 2023. And it's worth remembering, 23 was a low year as well. If you kind of track that back all the way back to 2024, it's actually the lowest number of home sales we've seen in the last, home listings, we've seen in the last decade. And so even lower than that, 2024 is most definitely the lowest level we've seen in more than a decade. So really there just isn't any inventory on the market. So that's, as I say, a consequence of many homeowners being locked into very low interest rates. So turn our attention now to the buyer side of this equation. And let's look at a couple of metrics which will give us a sense of buyer sentiment. First one is days on the market. Pretty straightforward. It's how long a property takes is on the market before it goes under agreement. We've seen it in the last couple of years in that kind of 30, 23, in fact, last year. And it's jumped significantly this year up to 35. So that really does begin to tell us that the buyer sentiment is struggling a little bit. Buyers are being somewhat hesitant about buying. There is some sellers putting homes on the market too expensive without realizing, even though inventory is low, buyers are somewhat hesitant about paying what many sellers think their home is worth. So that's in there too. But definitely this is an indication of a not very strong buyer community for the condo market here in Lexington. Another metric we look at is the average sale price to list price. So imagine a condo comes on at 800, sells at 800, that's 100% sale price to list price ratio. As you can see, the historic, it's around about 100, perhaps 101. And now we've dropped back this year. Last year was just over 102, I averaged it to 102. This year is lower at probably 101.5, 101.6. So it's kind of rounded it to 102, but less than we've seen previously, certainly 22, was 104, over 102 last year, under 102 this year. So a declining metric. What's important as well to remember is that this metric is higher in the first half of the year than it is in the second half of the year. Most homes sell in the first half of the year, 60% if you kind of look at it. What happens in the rest of the year tends to decline. Remember, the school systems If you want to get your children into the school system, you need to be in before August. Once you get past August, September, October, November, very few home sales. So this ratio is probably peaked here in that kind of June timeframe, and is probably destined to decline for the rest of the year. So we may well see, in fact, I think we will see a number which is less in 2024 than we saw in 2023. So that's important to kind of characterize the buyer sentiment, if you will, as actually not as strong as it was last year. And last year was pretty weak as well, because remember, interest rates were at those historic highs. Average sale price. Well, turns out the average sale price has actually risen this year to be over $1 million, $1,006,000. But there's a caveat to this one. If you look at, we've had relatively low number of sales. If you look at the homes that have sold, what's happening here is some of the new construction from a few years ago is beginning to sell. Because those were more expensive and somewhat larger, that's pulling up the average somewhat. So there's a slight discrepancy here with the average because of the mix of homes that are selling. There are a mix of the likes of Pfeiffer, Drummer Boy, and What a Pond and that. But now some of the other condo developments that were more expensive and now begin to turn over. And that's kind of pulling that up. Looking at the median is slightly higher. We've gone from 840 to 919, not as big a rise as we've seen in the average. And they say that's a consequence of those higher price condominiums selling, more recently built higher price condominiums selling, pulling up that average a little more than the median. But having said that, lack of inventory has meant that in many cases, the average price of condos has kind of ticked up just a little bit. So that's kind of what's going on today in the market. Let's turn our attention a little bit to the kind of wider perspective of what's going on for kind of external influences on the market. So no surprise, the big influence on the market today is interest rates. So this is the interest rates from 2010 all the way through to 2024. And you can see that drop from 2010 through 2013-14 remained static through 2015. Remembering that's when many people bought. Coming down from the crash as the market kind of readjusted, got itself back to normal, that's when people bought homes. And lo and behold, they've locked themselves into a very, very low interest rate. And now they're very reluctant to sell today at these much higher rates. If I can zoom that in a little bit, you can see that interest rates rose sharply in 2022 and first half of 23. Once they dropped somewhat at the end of 23, they're just kind of bouncing along, if you like, a little bit like a boring roller coaster, if you will. They're just kind of oscillating a little bit. We're not seeing that steady or that downward trend, which is what we really need to see for sellers to have confidence to put their home on the market, and buyers to have confidence that, guess what? I can now, with confidence, say that I can refinance moving forward as interest rates come down. Let's get our crystal ball. Let's get the crystal ball out on mortgage rate predictions. This is not my data. This is the Mortgage Banker Association. The blue here are actuals. And I broke out 22 and 23 and early 24 quarter by quarter just to show that large increase that we saw in that 2022 timeframe. But what they're predicting, Mortgage Banker Association, is that we will begin to see interest rates ease downwards. I think is probably the right way to put this. There's a caveat to this data. I look at this every month. It comes out every month, middle of the month. Their predictions for 2025 change every month. So there's no long-term continuity here in terms of the absolute numbers. There is somewhat in the trend, but not in the absolute numbers. So I wouldn't pay any attention to the number themselves. I would look more at where we see mortgage interest rates trend going. And that looks to be in a downward direction. A couple of unknowns on this one, of course. One is when they will cut interest rates. Now they're talking about 1 this year. When will inflation become under control? And the second big one, of course, is the election. And I have some sympathy with the people doing these predictions, because the election today anyway, it may change moving forward, but today anyway, seems to be a personality contest, not a contest of economic policy. Now, as I say, that may change, but I think that's impacting the accuracy of these predictions, in that you can't look at economic policy decisions or that potential government may make if and when they come in. You can't do that today, as I said, because it tends to be based more on personality than anything else. So I have some sympathy, although it does seem like that as inflation ticks down, as the economy cools, that we will begin to see those rates come down. But in terms of those absolute numbers, I would not hold anything to those. I would just look at the trend. So what that means with interest rates beginning to normalize somewhat, the effects of COVID having worked their way out of the system a year or two ago, that we're back to the regular downsizers, first-time home buyer cycle, move-up buyer cycle. So this population pyramid, I've shown this before, if you've watched presentations I've given, is from the Census Bureau. It shows how many people are in which age bracket. The top yellow bar are the downsizers. The baby boomers, they're about to downsize, to retire and downsize. That frees up capacity in the housing market. And then the first-time home buyers kind of move in to fill that where the downsizers were, and then move up buyers between. So we're returning to that regular cycle that we saw in that 2016, 2017 cycle before we had this kind of the effect of COVID, if you like, the disruption of COVID. So that's kind of the wider perspective. So I want to turn my attention, my attention to something we've not covered in a presentation before. We've thought a lot about it, but not really articulated our thoughts today. And it's specifically on the impact of the multifamily developments that we are seeing coming on stream in Lexington over the next few years. For those of you who have not kind of followed this and not watching this, there are a large number of current, well, I should say, excuse me, going back, I don't want to go back, but for multifamily development, read condo developments, right? So clearly that's what they mean when they say multifamily developments and multifamily zoning. Actually, what we're meaning in this is, in many cases, condominium complexes. So these are, as you go to the Lexington Planning Board's website, these are the current projects. And some of these numbers are quite large. If you look at 329 Concord, 200 units. Piper Road, 59 units. Pleasant Street, 100. Merriam Edgewood, 11, and so it goes on. Bedford Street's 30. Couple of unknowns right now. One is 475 Bedford Street. That's the tennis club. There's some question about whether that's going to be residential or whether it's going to be commercial. So there's a question over that. Time will tell. And also the recent announcement of a affordable unit development on the intersection of North Street and Lowell Street. I don't know how big those are going to be, even if they happen, of course, at least in terms of Bedford Street. I don't know how big those are going to be. But it looks like if you kind of add up the numbers, that we could end up with over 400 units coming on stream sometime in that kind of 2 to 3 year time frame. That's a large number of units. When you think about it, it's a relatively large. And if you kind of put it in the context of condominiums, because the vast majority, in fact, all of these are going to be condominiums, there are about 2,000 condominiums right now in Lexington. This could easily increase those by 500, perhaps even more. And that's a step increase in the number of condominiums coming on stream and actually within the town. And it's worthwhile asking, what's the impact of that going to be? Right. So let's see. So the first impact, and I kind of put this slide in because many of you have received in the mail, the community report from the Lexington Public Schools. And I thought, well, so imagine these homes come on stream. What's the impact going to be on the school system? So the US Census data tells us that there's about 1.94 children per family on average in the United States today. That's 2023 data. Multiplying the 425 condominiums by 1.94, of course, you get 820 additional children. That's clearly a very large number of additional children coming into the school system. What I thought was interesting in the community report was kind of buried on almost the last page of the report. It said, working with the town of Lexington, LPS will continue to monitor local multifamily zoning changes. Good idea. All of which remain a consideration for longer-term planning. And I'm not sure that longer-term planning is the term I would have used. But I'm not an expert on the school system. I'm going to focus instead on real estate. But I think this is something that we need to keep an eye on, because I do think that units will be coming on stream faster than people anticipate. Now, there's a couple of mitigation factors, and I'll go into that in a moment, but I still think we do need to think seriously about what the impact of these additional homes is going to be on all facets of the town, actually, for that matter. But let me focus on real estate. That's my area of expertise, so let me focus on. So, first thing I wanted to look at really is, okay, how many home sales do we anticipate in that 2025-2026 timeframe? Now, you saw this graph before, at least similar one. This is a combination of single-family and condominiums, essentially all home sales in Lexington, planned out since 2014, so over the last decade or just over the last decade. Blue is existing homes, green is new construction, and then this kind of orange color is the off-market teardowns. Those are homes which are torn down, bought off-market, torn down, and then converted into new construction. So that's the data. Looking at it as similar, single family was similar to condominium in that we anticipate fewer sales in 24 versus 23. And you can see that data there with my full year 2024 projection running at about 310, 20 home sales. Now, if we are to believe the Mortgage Backers Association, I guess we have no option to, we expect that as interest rates decline, show that kind of downward trend, so the number of home sales will increase. Sellers will think, okay, finally I can see a downward trend. I'm willing to move out of my existing 3.5% mortgage into a higher mortgage, maybe 6.5%, knowing I can over time refinance that, but get out of the home which doesn't fit your requirements. It's too big, it's too small, whatever it may be today. And there's kind of two schools of thought on this one. One says there'll be a gradual increase in the number of sellers coming on the market as interest rates slowly but methodically decline. If interest rates drop quickly, and we'll tell if that happens, of course, the other school of thought is that there are an awful lot of sellers right now who really want to move. And so once we reach that tipping point, I guess you would call it, those sellers are going to put their home on the market because they want to move. And so we'll have not a gradual increase in the number of homes coming on, but a more dramatic increase, if you will, in terms of the number of homes coming on the market. Now, I don't think today we can make a judgment between each of those two scenarios. I mean, it really does depend on the rate of change of the mortgage interest rate. We have no insight into that realistically. We may come the end of the year once the election's out of the way, but I think it really realistically will be in 2025 before we can get a sense of where we think that interest rate or what the rate of change of those mortgage interest rates is going to be. So for this analysis, I've chosen a more conservative approach, one where we've got a gradual increase in the number of homes coming on the market. Let me explain a little bit about where I got 350 and 400 from. If you go back to 2016 and 2017, we see that as the norm, if you will. Pre-COVID, after the recession, it was the time at which the market was kind of in equilibrium, a balanced market, if you will. Still, Lexington is a popular town, still somewhat of a seller's market, but not swayed, not influenced, disrupted by, be it the downturn, the economic downturn, the economic crash, not COVID, and so on. 18 and 19 were impacted by discussion around an economic downturn. COVID put pay to that. That was 2021, to some extent 22. So that 16 and 17 we see as the normal, if you will. And so I'm expecting home sales to begin to approach that normal. That normal, by the way, is about 450 in that kind of 26, 27 time frame. So I've been somewhat conservative about 2026, not returning to normal because interest rates will not have done that. And so I anticipate that 450 sales will be further out, maybe 2027, maybe 2028. Clearly, I can't see that far out. But so I've been somewhat conservative in terms of my projections for 25 and 2026, just to kind of put some perspective to those numbers or some justification to those numbers. So now let's layer on top of this the multifamily developments as they come on stream. So I've used 150 a year in 25, 26, moving forward. I have given you 27, 28, but you get the idea. So it looks like if they all sell, we will be at about, in 24/5, we'll be at about the same number we were during COVID. Not sure about that, but let's kind of play this out anyway. And then as we get to 2026, that's more home sales than we've frankly ever seen. We've been tracking this data for a long time, and that 550 home sales is higher than we'd seen. So the question really becomes twofold. First of all, can Lexington accommodate this number of new homes? This question. Second question is, what will the impact of that be? It's difficult, as you can imagine, to give definitive on what the impact will be. It's much simpler to give you a sense of where that impact will be. What will it impact? Quite how it will impact depends clearly on how many homes are sold, where interest rates go, how quickly these developments come on stream, and so on. So let's focus a little bit more here on where we think the impact of these larger number of homes. This is not 4 or 5 homes coming on a year. This is not even 20 homes coming on a year. We're talking of the order of 150 homes a year coming on stream. So what will be the impact on the existing housing market? So first area that I feel will be impacted is the residential rental market. What you see here is the rental market in Lexington, the number of homes that are rented. 2024 is a year to date, so ignoring that, looks like we're just shy of 200 rentals per year. I should add that this does not include the 2 Avalon developments. And we know that there are a large number of people in those developments that would like to buy in the town but can't because the homes don't exist. The homes at the right price point don't exist. And so I think it's fair to say if I was marketing these developments, one of the key markets I would be focused on is those people in Lexington who are currently renting, be it in Avalon or be it the residential market. So it will impact this, and I think quite sizably too, because this is a ready-made group of people who can move really quickly. Remember, they're not constrained by mortgage interest rates of 3.5%. They don't have a mortgage. They can move relatively quickly. And so this is a ready-made market. Now, the beauty of this market being the who moves into these new developments is, of course, this doesn't necessarily have a large impact on the services within the town because these people are already in the town. They're already in the school system and so on. So the beauty of this group is that they don't necessarily have as big an impact on the services within the town. So I think this is going to be one source of the buyers for those units. So let's look now at the single family and the condominium markets and ask ourselves, so okay, will they impact those markets? So this is, most of you will have seen if you've watched presentations done, sale price distribution. I I actually have those in a moment. This is the floor area distribution. That is, what's the distribution of floor areas of homes, that's condominiums, in this case, single family, in the next slide, condominiums, that are sold, in this case, in 2023, because I want a full year's worth of data. So this is 2023 data. What is the distribution of floor areas for homes sold? So for existing homes, there's almost none under 1,000 square feet. So, the idea of building one-bedroom apartments in Lexington just doesn't make sense, given that the vast majority of people who move into the town are looking for more than a one-bedroom development. And so the most of the existing homes are in that kind of 1,000 to 3,000 square foot range. And that's exactly where the majority of these developments are probably get to be built. So if you look further out in terms of square footage, that's where you see the new construction kick in. That's the green in this bar. It will have almost no impact on that because they're simply too big and too expensive. These condos are going to be built at a smaller footprint, therefore a smaller price point, and will have not as much impact on the existing large homes in the town and new construction market in the town. If I look now at condominiums, not as much data, of course, because there are far fewer condominium sales than there are single-family sales in the town. But you can see the majority of condominiums are in that kind of 1,000 square feet, some, not many, in the 2,000 square feet. So the smaller units that are built will have a direct impact on the existing condominium market. So if you're in 1,000, somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 square feet, you will be impacted by these additional units being built. If we now turn our attention to price, same idea here, sale price distribution, you can see that there are almost no home sales in Lexington under $1 million. They should be out. It's in the teens, actually, single family. And the majority are in that 1 to 2 million. That's where the majority of home sales are. Surprising. The average is $2 million, remember, for single family. And so that's exactly where these condominiums are going to be developed in terms of price point, in that kind of 1 to 2 million. So it'll have, an impact on the existing home, specifically the somewhat smaller, therefore less expensive homes in Lexington. So I expect that to be where the impact is, because they're going to directly compete with existing homes in that kind of price range. In terms of the condominium market, not quite as simple, given that there are a considerable number of, there's more condominium sales less than $1 million than there are single family. So the question is, will those actually be impacted? The likes of Viper Lane, Drummer Boy, and Potter Pond, and so on. What impact will it have on those? On the face of it, probably not as much, because building 700,000 price point condominiums may well not be the sweet spot for the condos that are developed. We don't have that much insight into the size and so on and price today. We will moving forward, of course. But there is something here that is important in that many of those older condominium complexes are beginning to show their age and actually have higher than normal condominium fees. The new condominiums that are being built, perhaps they're a little more expensive, but their condominium fees may well be cheaper. So, do you buy a unit that's a little more expensive, but save $200-300 a month on your condominium fee and put that to the mortgage? And so it may well be, depending on how these play out and the kind of facilities and therefore the condo fees that they offer, whether we will see buyers choosing to prefer a slightly more expensive but with a slightly lower condo fee unit versus the existing condos that are out today. So it's likely that there will still be impact on those on the existing condominiums in Lexington. So that's kind of where we are right now with the impact of this multifamily development. There's lots to unpick here, clearly, lots to unpack. Lots more analysis to be done. But I did want to kind of bring to your attention where we're thinking is today. It'll solidify as we move forward to the rest of 24 and into 25. But I want to kind of show you where our thinking is today so that you'll understand when we kind of add more detail to this moving forward, where we are. So let's focus then on predictions to 2024 and actually 2025. So we've got far fewer condominium sales in 2024 than we saw in 2023 because of sellers just not moving. We are seeing as well some reticence on the buyers, some hesitation, that's a better word, from the buyers in terms of buying into these units. Some because sellers still think their home is perhaps slightly more worth more than it actually is. But secondly, a little bit conscious of the high condominium fees. How that's not necessarily, if interest rates decline, high condominium fee won't necessarily decline. So we are seeing some hesitation again on buyers of condominiums in Lexington. Remember that in general, the average condominium fee here in Lexington is just about double what it is in Arlington. And that raises a question specifically for first-time home buyers. Do I save the money on the condo fee and put it on the mortgage, or do I buy a cheaper car, or do I, not and pay the extra condo fee? So I think those are the kind of questions, and there's nothing new in that. We've kind of seen this play out in the past, where we've actually seen in prior years existing condominiums see their average price decline. And that's because of those questions around the condominium fee. And am I better off actually taking that money and putting it into a slightly higher price unit with a slightly higher mortgage? So there's a question there. So that's kind of where we are. As I think about moving forward, 24, 25, it really is predicated on what happens with interest rates and to some extent what happens with the elections. How does that impact the rate at which mortgage interest rates decline? That's really the big question. We don't have much insight into that. We will as we get closer to the election, hopefully. So that's kind of where we are. A little bit of uncertainty as we come into 2025. We're not really sure where that will end. So with that, I want to say thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this presentation. We do this about once every quarter or so. And so if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk about any aspect of what I've just talked about in this presentation. So with that, I'll say thank you and goodbye. Bye. That was better, wasn't it? Yep.